This conference is about tipping points, which I guess to me are a moment where something mundane becomes something momentous, or maybe a moment where something momentous comes to gain some sort of fittingly unstoppable momentum. And it seems like many of these talks risk being sort of self-indulgent, and some of these talks can risk being sort of self-indulgent, and speaking about tipping points maybe risks being even more so. So please keep in mind that the story I'm going to share is premised largely on luck and privilege and in general being very silly and experimenting and having fun. So in keeping with the theme, let's start with just the tip. I've always liked to cook, and my family's loved to cook, my friends have loved to cook. Cooking was something incredibly important when I was growing up. By the time I was in high school, I was writing a food review column for my high school newspaper, which when I looked it up a few days ago, I had not the most insightful things to say. Here I said that pizza is delicious with a sort of saucy, cheesy, bready taste. But by the time I was in college, I was studying economics and sociology. But I was also becoming increasingly excited about finding amazing ingredients, cooking in an improvisational and collective way, and in general, just trying to avoid the dining hall as best I could. Here's a photo that I snapped of some dining hall soup. I garnished it myself with this frowny-faced napkin. But I realized that I could walk a few blocks away from campus and go to a farmer's market or a grocery store and spend less money than the dining hall cost and make something like this. And more importantly, have a far more socially fulfilling experience eating it. So this idea sort of evolved and snowballed until I was regularly having friends and acquaintances come to my apartment, to my dorm, for these shared supper club meals. It was a ton of fun. I had just as much fun sort of curating the environment for dining, the music that I was playing, the art that was up on the wall, setting the table. All this stuff excited me just as much as actually cooking. And it was like, totally delightful. And what was funny is that this project did not go on for more than 2 weeks before, by any definition, it tipped. The school newspaper wrote some article about it. My friend gave a silly comment to the school newspaper, and which so be it. But then this article got shared a bajillion times on the internet. And I was like scratching my head trying to figure this out. Everybody wanted to talk about the dorm room chef and dorm room cooking and this fine dining happening in a dorm room. And it was really bizarre to me because it was people were writing these articles without coming to taste my food or seeing what was going on. And here, this is particularly funny to me because the hottest table in town has a photo of me sitting on my shitty twin XL bed. There's no table. And if you looked at the table, it would be obvious that I picked this up off the free section of Craigslist. And the food on it, there's no way that this food is genuinely the nicest food in New York or the finest dining. It's just not. And so it was unusual for me because I was really excited about how excited everyone else was about what I was doing, but I felt like it was a misrepresentation of what was going on. I was trying to protest that I wasn't a chef. That's a title that you earn after years and years of apprenticeship and practice in the industry. I wasn't running a restaurant. I had at most 15 people in my dorm every week. But these articles kept coming, and soon I was just like, I am the dorm room chef, which is a terrible moniker to have once you've graduated. But when I started thinking about it a little more deeply, I started realizing that maybe the reason people were so excited about talking about my supper club and coming to my supper club was that this was a dining experience that prioritized accessibility and social interaction just as much, if not more, than the food itself. At my supper club, there was no menu. I ate with my guests. Everybody chipped in for the cost, and we all helped clear the table. And these kind of things, while they're normal for a family meal or for a picnic with friends, It's unusual for a dining experience that you have to pay money for and that you have to make a reservation for. Restaurants, to me, are unusual. They serve food in a hyper-accommodating and hierarchical way that, ironically, is very socially isolating. Like when we go to a restaurant, we spend a lot of money for the privilege of talking down to servers, judging food that comes out without having any role in witnessing its transition from ingredient to dish. We are under no obligation to get to know anybody besides those that we came with. And in general, instead of treating dining as an opportunity for social interaction, it seems like restaurants are often a way to go to minimize the time we spend around food, to get in and get out, to not deal with raw ingredients, and in general, to view hunger as a periodic and isolated problem that, if you have money, you can just quickly solve. And this was interesting to me because in all aspects, I've always sort of felt that the best way to connect with people is by creating and consuming something together. So even as this dorm room cooking was blowing up, I started playing around with a lot of other experimental dining stuff. So I went to an art gallery in Manhattan and was serving snacks on these cool pieces of pottery and furniture that I had collaborated with people on, serving these snacks for free on the street. I helped curate a series of concerts that integrated food and music in unusual ways. We would pass around hors d'oeuvres on platters that had speakers embedded in them, and just like funny things like that. Then most recently, I was at a totally normal restaurant, but it was really fun because I had the opportunity to design and develop the dining space, not just the food. So I got to have strangers sitting next to each other, have food come out collectively in waves, play the music I wanted to play. And in general, across all these projects, sort of attempt to create an extremely convivial vibe for dining. I found this exciting because it was exhilarating to watch people enjoy so much dining in all of these different spaces that the only thing connecting them was just this very abstract interest in making dining something very participatory and something very social. I had learned, even though the dorm room cooking I was doing had become so viral and tipped or whatever due to this easily retweetable dorm room chef thing, there was something really gratifying to see that everybody was seeking an experience that was different from the traditional restaurant, whether or not it was in a dorm. Everybody was seeking socially enfranchising experiences, whether or not it was in the dorm, and the more I thought about it, whether or not it had to do with dining. I started to connect this dining project, this dining facet of my life, with the stuff I was studying in school, which I had before then viewed very disparately. Like I said, I was studying economics and sociology, and particularly I was interested in wealth and income inequality. And even more specifically, how on a very small scale social dynamics could be both contributing and potentially offering solutions to inequality. I conducted research on worker-owned cooperatives, businesses that are owned and operated by workers collectively, where every worker in a cooperative has a voice in decision-making and a stake in the profits of the company. And I was interested in how these businesses might be, could maybe be creating wealth and value and satisfaction in a far more equitable and sustainable way than traditional businesses. So I mean, some of the very grandiose, paralyzing facts about inequality that I was grappling with were things like this, watching workers' productivity go up and up and up every year, yet having wages completely stagnate since the 70s. Things like having the top 5% of Americans control over 60% of the wealth in our country. Or things like the minimum wage simply falling in real value over and over and over again. And it was interesting that people were looking at these sort of paralyzing facts about inequality and coming up with equally grandiose solutions to talk about. Not bad ones, but things like tax policy and welfare programs, which are important to discuss and necessary to have in society, but sort of just as grandiose. And I was excited that the idea of something so small as an individual business and the way it was structured could be impacting inequality. And my research showed that these worker-owned cooperatives failed far less frequently than traditional businesses. They reacted with less volatility during financial crises, and they compensated their workers better. You made more money working at a cooperative than at a similar business that was not cooperatively owned. And it was exciting to see this happen, like to be doing this research just as my dorm room dining stuff was going on. Trust me that they have anything to do with each other. Like I was saying, all this dorm room cooking and the other projects that came out of it taught me that the satisfaction people derived from an experience had less to do with the fanciness or the quality of what they were consuming, but the extent to which they could participate and engage with that process of creating and consuming. And I started to see these total strands of connection between my academic studies and these more creative ones. I started to see that social enfranchisement was at the key and the core of all of these endeavors. And that just as worker-owned cooperatives were offering an alternative to the traditional business, with all of its shortcomings, that perhaps this idea of a supper club could be offering some sort of alternative to the shortcomings of a restaurant. And that even more generally, a lot of creative endeavors like art and music and dining tend to be created in a similarly isolating way, where the point is to create a sort of commodity that can be desired and purchased and used and dissipated. And that both in worker ownership and in the realm of dining, there was a serious, profound need for something different. So I guess for me, if there's anything I've taken away from this past silly year of my life, it's that what made my supper club tip was so silly. It was people wanting to imagine that I was serving like mounds of caviar on a week-old pizza box in a dorm room and like tweet about it and talk about it and write articles about it. But beneath that, there was something really deeply compelling, this need for a socially engaging experience. And when I thought about that, it made my academic studies and my interest in inequality and battling that inequality from a very localized social level make far more sense. It left me feeling that, like what makes fine dining fine, and what maybe makes fine living fine, is to what extent we can participate in the creation of what we consume, to what extent we can find creative and social agency in what we are making and consuming. And in that sense, it's left me extremely energized to continue creating alternatives to the restaurant. And I hope for all people, an urge to create alternatives to whatever their endeavor is, the business, anything, thinking always about this idea of social enfranchisement and participatory activities, that being the core of what makes for a just and creatively fulfilling society. So thank you.